Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet presented by OTGBasketball.com. Make sure you follow OTG on Twitter at OTGBasketball. Also hit that subscribe button. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, on the NBA Outlet, my guy, Corey Waldron. What's up, Corey?
We're going to have to find a new Knicks storyline to follow. It's the
Yes,
Knicks
yes.
media story for the last year and a half, it feels like. I'm kind of disappointed.
Yeah, if it wasn't Phil Jackson, it was Carmelo Anthony being moved, and, the NBA is crazy. I thought we were going to take the weekend off. I didn't bring my mic or anything. I was like, you know what? Kyrie was already traded. It looks like Melo might stay in New York. Next thing you know, you text me, Melo's traded. We can't record the pod because we're a little bit under the influence, so we had to wait till today, but pretty excited to talk about another big trade in the NBA.
The NBA never sleeps. I guess that's the best way to put it after yesterday.
And that is very true.
Just when you think it's the calm before the storm, just when you think it's safe, you see a Waj bomb or a Shams bomb pop up on Twitter.
Honestly, it's like you need to have your phone at all times during the NBA season and off season. But let's talk about this trade. Melo was traded to OKC for Doug McDermott, Enes Kanter, and a second-round pick. I mean, this is crazy that it's happening at this time of the year.
It's wild, especially for who was trading this deal in Kanter, and he recently just said, how Oklahoma City was home. Just another player who got traded, after saying how loyal he was to a franchise. And then we see one of the biggest guys we were waiting all offseason to get moved, finally moved, the training camp right around the corner.
Yeah, honestly, like if you asked me at the beginning of the offseason, which big name do I think would be moved first, I probably would have said Carmelo Anthony as, one of the top names that I was almost for sure going to, see on another team. And almost at this point, this whole month, it kind of felt like Melo might stay in New York to the deadline.
Yeah, it definitely felt that way, especially with the Knicks had, their press conference or whatever on, Friday or Thursday. And everyone, they all stayed packed. They were saying that Melo was going to be in training camp. Melo was a professional. They really didn't seem like they were rushing to make a deal.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I thought the Knicks' new management did a good job, keeping their spot and not, making that trade with Houston for Ryan Anderson, because obviously that wouldn't have worked out. This wasn't a great trade, but like you said, let's talk about the timeline a little bit. I think it was this past Friday at, Knicks front office media day. Scott Perry said, Melo's going to be in camp on Monday. Next thing you know, there's some rumor pops up. Melo's applying pressure to the Knicks. He wants to be traded before training camp. He adds a few more options to the team, and it's within almost 24 hours he's traded to OKC. And, Presti is doing an amazing job in OKC. But what did you think about this Knicks timeline? It kind of tells you about the NBA. They might say one thing, and next thing you know, the guy's out the door.
I mean, I think you have to do that only because they probably wanted to keep all their options open on the table. They didn't want any team to think that a deal was imminent. They didn't want, it probably actually, it might have upped Melo's trade value slightly. We're not going to move Melo because then people are probably thinking, well, if Melo's off the market, that is an all-star caliber player that no one can have.
Yeah,
and really elevated it, but it might have slightly.
And no, but you used a great word, leverage. And, Phil Jackson, being the previous president of basketball operation, kind of killed all leverage for Melo. And like you said, the new front office did a pretty good job making it, not everyone thinking it's a lock that Melo's going to be traded. They kind of held their ground. Obviously, the value isn't great, but it's still better than what they probably would have got, 2 months ago.
No, it's just I said it yesterday on Twitter. The biggest stretch of time in any franchise, between the NBA, the NFL, and MLB, where we've seen so many all-star to superstar level players traded within like a 6-month window. It's absolutely crazy how much just moving a big star. You don't see guys like Melo, Paul George, DeMarcus Cousins, Kyrie Irving. I mean, these are all top caliber players. You just don't see trades like this, falling. It feels like almost once a month we're seeing a big name player move.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, it's like, these all-star players are not getting good value. If you look at it from, perception on like another New York team, the Nets trade Brook Lopez, obviously they take the Mozgov salary dump and they include a late first-round pick, but they get a young piece like D'Angelo Russell. In the case for the Knicks, there's no young pieces in here and they're still getting Kanter's contract. So, but let's talk about the OKC side. What this means for OKC. This offseason they added 2 all-stars after losing Kevin Durant a year ago. They're okay. They add Paul George and Carmelo Anthony, 2 of the top small forwards in the NBA. Obviously, Melo might play a little 4, but what were your initial thoughts from the OKC side on this?
They also, after almost signing Trey Burke yesterday, and Trey Burke deciding not to sign with them, they signed Isaiah Cannon, who played last year with Chicago, also today. so they actually got a backup point guard. But yeah, getting Melo and Paul George alongside Russell Westbrook, waiting to see if Westbrook signs that extension with OKC to stay long term. But right now, Melo has a player option for next year, free agent. But if all these guys resign, this could be a really good team for a couple of years ago. I don't think they're contenders. I think anyone who says the Thunder are contending need to pump the brakes a little bit. We still have to see how these guys gel. We still have to see how the bench works out. But anytime you have 3 All-Stars on a team, it's going to be extremely deadly.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't even know what other pieces they can get. Obviously, people have talked buyouts, but I just think you look at the job Presti did bringing pieces like this, after losing a guy like Kevin Durant, and now, you're back in the top of the West, like you said, not on Golden State's level, but you still have the talent on your team. But how do you think this is all going to work? Obviously, all 3 of these guys have led teams at some point. Russ obviously led the Thunder last year to the playoffs in an MVP season. Paul George was the main cog on the Pacers, and even Carmelo has been the main guy in the Knicks for quite some time. So now all coming on one team. How do you think each guy is going to have to adjust a little bit?
Well, Westbrook is going to be still the guy. I think without question, this is Russell Westbrook's team. I think Russell Westbrook, of all 3 of these guys, is the best player. I'm not expecting him to have a giant drop in numbers. If anything, I expect the assist numbers to go up. Paul George is going to play more of an off-ball guard, wing type of player. I think you'll see his three-point percentage rise slightly. I think he'll be a lot of the time, sitting at the three-point line. And then Melo, we're going to see him where I think he's going to flourish, and that's at the 4. Too slow, I think, to play the 3 defensively. But because he's such a big body, he can stick with most fours, and he can at least stretch out to the three-point line. And because the new age of basketball is all small ball, this could really benefit Melo too, going back into the later part of his career, being 33.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm just going to kind of touch on everything you said. I agree with the Westbrook thing. I think this year he's going to become more of a playmaker. And I think also, as much as Russ is so amazing when he's super fast, I think this year he needs to just take it down a bit. Going fast to slow is a big deal. And having the pieces around him, he doesn't have to do it all by himself. So he kind of has to work those guys in. And like you said, Paul George off ball, we talked about this off air, yesterday. He's going to be great cutting, coming off screens, being another 3-point shooter that gives him spacing. Obviously, the guys they've played in the past have not kind of give Westbrook what he needed scoring wise. And then you have a guy like Melo, like you said, at the 4, he's going to be able to shoot the ball. He can handle the ball. He's still deadly in the, the low post. He definitely should pick up his rebounding, but I think I kind of really am expecting a nice year from him. This is probably the most talented team he's played on since Denver, maybe.
I mean, it's definitely one of the most star-powered teams that Melo's been on probably ever. Obviously that Denver team you mentioned had J.R. Smith, Allen Iverson, Kenyon Martin. I think Birdman was on that team too. That was a really good Denver
I think
team.
Was on there too.
Yeah, a young Nene. That team was extremely good. The Knicks team, obviously, with Tyson Chandler and Marty Stoudemire were interesting, and J.R. Smith. But, Melo hasn't been on a relevant team since 2013. This is one of his first years to actually compete. And, I don't think the Thunder, like I said a couple minutes ago, aren't going to be contending. But this is a team that is arguably a top 3 team in the West. And if you look between the East and the West, it's probably either the 4th or 5th best team in the entire league now.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, they definitely have some real talent. And, we haven't done our OKC preview yet, so I don't want to leak too much information. But starting-wise, we'll be talking Westbrook. We think Robertson, Paul George, Melo, and Steven Adams. Defensively, we know Westbrook wasn't good defensively last year. He kind of had to do so much offensively, and he just kind of, tried to pick the pocket every time. This year, he steps up defensively. We know Paul George can defend when he wants to. Melo's somewhat of a question mark, but I think he has the ability to defend if he wants to. And, Robertson and Adams are definitely great defenders.
Yeah, and I think having one poor defender, when you have, 2 really good defenders, a rim protector, and Westbrook who can turn it up a notch, it's not the worst thing to have Melo be the worst defender on the court because you have guys around him who can pick up the slack. I mean, obviously Melo can't be god-awful defensively, but if he's average to mediocre, it won't really be that big of an issue, especially because this offensively, 3 guys who can all average over 20 points per game.
Yeah, very true. If you had to give me a prediction right now, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. Give me Westbrook's point per game, George's, and Melo's.
I mean, obviously, Westbrook's not going to average the insane numbers they did last year. I'm going to say, I'll give you Westbrook's entire stat line.
Okay.
I'm gonna say Westbrook averages 25. Eh, yeah, 25.6 points per game. He'll average probably eight to 9 rebounds. I think the rebounds are going to drop slightly, but I think he's going to average, right around 11.5 to 12 assists per game.
I'm gonna say I would probably take it down a touch. I think Westbrook would probably be, still in that, mid 20 range, but I'll have him more at like a 24. And then I think, rebounding, you're right. He's gonna take a drop. I see him at that 7 and 8 because last year, I'll be honest, like he was fighting for rebounds with his own teammates, so he get the triple double. I don't think he cares as much about the triple doubles this year. It's more about winning. Not to say that he didn't have winning in his best interest, but he definitely put some extra effort in for that. Assist wise, though, I agree with you. I could see him with double digit assists. Having guys like just think about the difference of talent that he's playing with offensively. He's never had two great offensive players. Maybe since Kevin Durant and James Harden were on the team.
I mean, just thinking about Westbrook
at that time.
Just thinking about Westbrook like pushing the tempo, and then a drive and dish out to Melo, a drive and dish out to Paul George. I mean, he hasn't had that since Kevin Durant. And, last year he didn't have anybody like that. He still averaged 10 assists per game.
Yeah. And one nice thing they can do is they can stagger all these minutes. Let me have you finish and give me your predictions for Paul George and Melo.
For Paul George, I don't know how much his numbers are going to raise, but I do think he's going to average probably right around the same, either 22 to 23 points per game. I think his field goal percentage is going to be a little bit higher. He shot 46% from the field last year. I'm going to say that stays about right. I think he's going to shoot well over 40 for 3-point next year. I think between the spacing of having Westbrook and Melo, it's going to give a guy like Paul George, who, like you mentioned, running off screens, cutting. Paul George is going to actually be a beneficiary of having a guy like Westbrook because he's never played with any type of player. Paul George has always been the best player on his team. He's never had a very good playmaker around him. Last year with Jeff Teague was probably the best playmaker he's ever had. And he's never had a guy who can take the ball and give him a bucket. Like Paul George has always had to be the guy to give them a bucket. And I think it's going to be so ideal for Paul George to play alongside a guy like Westbrook and having Melo, with the veteran leadership. I know people are going to say Melo's not a leader, but I mean he does pretty well as the leader of that USA basketball team, which does matter a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think it does too. I don't mind Melo as a leader. I think that's a little bit overstated. I think obviously playing in New York, a lot of people don't like him and they have a little bit of bias towards him. But I think, the situation has never been that ideal for him to ever win anything. He had that one match in the second round against your Pacers. But other than that, no team was really amazing. But I agree with you, Paul George. I think, when you look at Paul George, I don't necessarily think he'll ever be, the best player on a championship team, but he definitely can be the second best player. So having a guy like Russell Westbrook around is amazing.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like you said, he just doesn't have that kind of – your best player has to be a full-blown leader. You look at Westbrook, that guy to me is a full-blown leader. I mean, the way he does it may be slightly different, but, you look at a team, you can always tell who the leader is. And, the Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, that dynamic Thunder Buddy duo was really fun to watch, but you constantly had to battle because you had two alpha dogs on that team. He was an alpha dog, and Kevin Durant, to a degree, is an alpha dog because he needs the ball in his hands to be as great as he is. And we saw with the Warriors last year in the postseason, they really let Kevin Durant be that alpha dog. And we saw what happened last year with Westbrook as the alpha dog. The guy averaged a triple-double 44 times. He dropped a triple-double last year. I mean, that's incredible.
Exactly. And I think you mentioned, the fact that it's not Westbrook by himself and it was a Westbrook and Durant. So it was like my turn, your turn type of thing, or, it's like me and you arguing. But when you have a third head at the table, Melo, Paul George, and Westbrook, it's kind of harder. You need the ball moving. You need to get things moving. And it's kind of easier, I think, for them to spread things around. It's going to be interesting to see what Billy Donovan does offensively compared to the offensive talent they had last year on OKC.
And I think they're all different points of their career, think about Westbrook and Durant were up and coming. They were still growing and becoming better basketball players. Melo was obviously, as we know, 33 on the downside of his career. So I'm sure Melo understands that he's not the and shoot the ball 18 times per game player anymore. I mean, there's going to be nights where we see Melo take that many shots. But I think Melo is going to be more understandable that he is a third option at this point in his career. And I think Paul George will understand that, this is a chance for me to breathe a little bit more on offense. And Westbrook can be like, all right, and the tempo, I don't have to be crazy. I don't have to fight my own teammates for rebounds this year. I can play more within myself.
I mean, just imagine this. Imagine last year's OKC team having a Paul George or even a Carmelo Anthony in that Houston series. That might have went, 7 games, and OKC might have came out on top. We saw what happened when Westbrook had to go to the bench, and by the time the fourth quarter came, he was super gassed.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing you mentioned, Nick. The good thing about having these two guys is even if the bench is bad, you can stagger minutes. You can have Melo and Westbrook off the floor, keep Paul George out there. If you want to just have Melo out there for some offense, Melo can do some isolation with some other guys around him. With having 3 All-Stars, we see what the Warriors do it. You always have one of your top guys out on the floor, and it makes a difference.
Exactly, especially when you have some of these guys going up against backup players, because a lot of teams in the NBA don't have that full-rounded bench. But I'm going to get a quick prediction. What is the highest seed OKC can get this season?
Oh, wait a minute. Let me give the Melo stat real quick.
Oh, yeah, give the Melo stat real quick.
For Melo, I don't think he's going to average. I think he's going to average over 20. I don't think that changes. I think he's only going to average, though, like 21 points per game. But I think we're going to see one of the most efficient Carmelo Anthony seasons to date. I'm thinking he's going to shoot right around 45%, from the field. And I wouldn't be surprised if he shot in the upwards of 36 to 38% from 3. I think he's going to be, he's playing with 2 really good all-stars. Paul George right in the cusp of being a superstar, and Westbrook, who is a superstar.
Yeah, I mean, he's playing with 2 guys top 5 at their position. So obviously, anytime you do that, that's great. I think Melo, I probably have him at around 18. I think some nights he's not going to be as involved, but I think rebounding wise and assist wise, he'll pick it up a little bit, and just his overall effort. Like we did mention, I think he's 33 or 34 years old. He did have knee surgery a couple years ago, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're a little bit easier with him. But then come playoff time, his minutes pick up.
You know what I hate? I hate when people say Melo's not a good passer. Because Melo's not a bad passer. He just doesn't pass in a high degree.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of time to his defense, he didn't necessarily have guys to pass to that were going to hit shots in New York. There were some real bad teams he had to play with.
I mean, wait, Nick, you tell me you don't trust Lance Thomas or Derrick Rose to take a 3-point shot or something?
I don't know. I mean, he caught that dude. I mean, I almost feel bad for Melo for how much hate he caught in New York, and it's going to be nice. Kind of like I mentioned on the Jazz preview pod. Like, it was nice to see Joe Johnson have some success out of, that contract, where Melo's probably going to have some success out of New York, and people are going to be like, oh, he still has it. Obviously this offseason there's been so much talk about him in the ESPN rank being the 64th ranked player. Like, obviously he's come down from, the top 20, but I think this year he has a little bit more to prove.
I think there's more to prove this season, for sure. If you want to be honest, between all 3 of these guys, there's more to prove, because Westbrook wants to go at the Warriors. Paul George, he's got that a little bit of a bad taste in some people's mouth around the league because of how he handled the Pacers situation. Melo being ranked 64th with, Lonzo right in front of him, and a lot of people throwing shade at his game. There's a lot of people on this roster who want to silence some critics.
Yeah, this is kind of like a badass team if you look at it. Like, it has a little bit of like chip on my shoulder, like toughness. Like, it's almost like some of the forgotten guys. Like, Russ obviously won MVP, so you can't really call him forgotten. But still to this day, a lot of people have Steph Curry ahead of him in, terms of player ranking, point guard ranking. And, he was just a monster last year. But that's for another day. Let's talk Knicks side of this. No Melo in New York. It's going to be the first time in a while. They're going to go full rebuild. This is now Kristaps Porzingis' team. What were your initial thoughts from the Knicks side of this trade?
I mean, I know you're going to bring up the math you did yesterday. It's another big man. I don't know where they plan on playing Kanter. Obviously, he's going to come off the bench, but you got Joakim Noah, Porzingis, Herman Gomez, and now Kanter in the mix. Doug McDermott, that's a whatever. I mean, Doug McDermott plays less defense than Melo, so congratulations, Knicks fans. You're going to complain about Melo's defense. Now you have Doug McDermott.
Kanter, too. Kanter probably is one of the worst defensive big men in the league.
If Harris is listening, Harris, this is a team that's going to win more games than last year, right? So I'm not positive how this team is better when you lose a player like Carmelo Anthony. I mean, who knows? Porzingis, for all it's worth, could light it up next year and be incredible. He's obviously going to get a ton of touches. I think almost 15 shots a game last year. He's going to probably take, I don't know, possibly 20 shots a game.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no one else really on this team to take shots, so he's going to get his money's worth every night. But
Yeah.
this is going to be a Knicks team with a lot of growing pains.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I did the math yesterday. I think the Knicks have, $37 million tied up to the center position with Joakim Noah, Enes Kanter, and Herman Gomez. Obviously he's only at like a rookie deal, so it's around 1 million. So the other two guys are making around 17 a year. Kanter's 17 this year, and then he's got a player option for next year, which is kind of unknown if he's going to take it. I don't think he'll get that money again, so he might stay in that contract. So the money's going to be locked up for quite some time. I think the Knicks, though, are probably going to go like full out rebuild, and they're going to let Frank Ntilikina play big minutes by the end of the year. Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to play big minutes. Herman Gomez, Kristaps Porzingis. Let these guys develop and kind of do things the right way. It might be like a salty season for the Knicks, and kind of they won't be good, but it's the right step moving forward for this team, in my opinion.
I mean, and actually the 2018 second round pick from the Chicago Bulls. We mentioned on the previous years, the Bulls are not going to be very good. So that actually second round draft pick is going to be rather high, most likely.
Yeah, it's going to be more like it's more like a late first.
Yeah, that's not going to be it. That's probably the best part about this deal. Actually, is that draft pick. Obviously, Kanter can ball. It's not like he's a bad offensive player, but like you mentioned, that guy just doesn't play defense.
Yeah, you put him in a pick and roll, you're going to be in trouble. He can provide offense. I know he was in the Sixth Man of the Year talk last year. And you mentioned McDermott, like he still hasn't really done anything as an NBA player. Shooting is so important in the NBA, so maybe he works out in New York. He's going to get a chance to really play a lot. So maybe that does work out for him. So it's tough to say, but, do you think the Knicks could have got a better offer, or, the fact that they needed to trail Melo by Monday, this was the best they could do?
I know they gauged the Cavs to see if they could get Tristan Thompson. I found that funny too because they just went after another center. I'm not sure what the deal is with them chasing centers so hard. And we know that they weren't really interested in acquiring Ryan Anderson from the Rockets. They didn't want to get another big.
And the funny thing is, some people might say Kristaps' Porzingis. No, his best position would be at the center position.
If you play ball lineup with the seven for Porzingis at center, Porzingis is obviously very mobile, so you do like that out of Porzingis at the center position. My biggest pet peeve with Porzingis is the guy at times is allergic to rebounding. And we're talking about a guy who has yet to average more than 8 rebounds per game. From a guy who's 7'1" or whatever he is, you should be grabbing rebounds, in your sleep, your eyes closed.
Yeah, no, and obviously the size issue could be, moving forward, that could kind of be his position, but right now it might be best to play power forward. I think what this says to me is that they really just know they're not going to play Joakim Noah, and he's going to be more of a locker room type guy, in my opinion.
That's a great $17 million locker room guy, let me tell you.
Yeah, that contract is horrendous, and I think the only way you get rid of that is if you attach some draft picks, and I don't think it makes sense to do that in the rebuilding phase. You're better off just eating it and kind of letting the guys develop.
The Knicks aren't going to be relevant. Sorry, Knicks fans. For probably another 3 to 4 years. And that's at best.
At least they have Kristaps.
Yeah. Luckily Porzingis is only 21. He's going to be 22. So by the time Porzingis hits his prime, in his mid-20s, 25, 26, hopefully the Knicks have a decent team around them.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of could almost work out for the Knicks. Like I said, a lot of teams like to do this retool or quick rebuild. Like, I think, Phil Jackson kind of tried to do that when he got into New York, and that just didn't work out. So, but let's talk,
it was questionable when he tried to do a quick retool and he traded away Shumpert and J.R. Smith for nothing.
Yeah, and then they turned out, obviously things in New York were really messy at that point, and some of it probably was on Phil Jackson. They got no value for him, and then they go to Cleveland. Obviously, JR has done really good. Shumpert's had his moments too. So, but we mentioned early on the pod, the NBA has just been wild. So I think this is probably going to continue into the regular season. So I got one more prediction for you. What big name is going to be traded by the deadline this year?
You mentioned this prior, and I tried to put some thought into it, in between us talking. I think the biggest guy who could possibly be moved, come to mind immediately, and that's Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. Those guys automatically pop into my head. Even though I think the Pelicans are going to be pretty good, if that team falls apart, you worry about Cousins walking, so you might want to dish off Cousins. We know the Celtics, for example, are extremely interested in trying to get Anthony Davis. I think you mentioned in our previous pod they could do like possibly a Godfather type deal to try and get Anthony Davis if it came to that. Those guys, I think Eric Bledsoe might be very likely. We've heard him in a lot of talks, so it's possible they could move an Eric Bledsoe. But there's a lot of teams right now that I don't know if any big time name is really on the market.
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily a name on the market this year, but I think you're right. If the Pelicans struggle, I don't know about moving Anthony Davis. Like, if I was in charge, I could never move a player of his talent unless I was getting, the best offer ever. But DeMarcus, if things are going really sour, that would make sense to move him. He's on an expiring deal. Another situation I would keep an eye on is Memphis. Marcus Gasol is a name I mentioned a few times on here, and I could see if the Grizzlies really struggle. I think that's another name the Celtics have had interest in. So that could be a guy. Eric Bledsoe, like you said, anytime you have a player of his caliber on a bad team, that's possibly another trade. Going a little bit lower level players, I think Reggie Jackson, Andre Drummond, I would almost, I'd put that at almost 33% that one of them is traded this season.
No, that's I point is extremely good. We talked about it on the previous podcast. Especially for me, I don't think they're going to be very good this year, and I think they're going to struggle. So if they're trying to rebuild, I mean, you can't move Mike Conley because of that contract. I don't think many teams will trade for him. But Marcus Gasol, there's not very many defensive centers who can stretch out to the 3-point line
and pass the ball like he does.
Exactly. He's very valuable, and he'd have to probably fit very well with that great Celtics. So that's a good guy. And then you mentioned
Drummond and Jackson.
Drummond and Jackson. Jackson, like we mentioned, had a very bad season last year because of the knee tendonitis. So, if he struggles his value right now is probably pretty low. Drummond's value, that guy has yet to develop anything to his game offensively, but he's a rebounding machine. And I wouldn't be surprised either, Nick, if the Pistons stumbled because they didn't make any great moves this offseason. If they wanted to, try and free up some cap space, if Van Gundy gets that short temper of his going and he wants to make a move because he is the head of the basketball operations, I wouldn't be shocked if one of those guys gets moved.
Yeah, and like you said, they're both a disappointment. I think it's like the Pistons are in a weird situation, so I don't know what's really going on with that team, but we'll see what happens. It was nice to kind of take a break from the preview series, but we'll get back to that this week. Thank you, Corey, for hopping on. As always, thanks everybody for listening.
Always a pleasure, Nick.